everybody. We're so happy today to have our speakers here. This is our Meet the Media training, engaging diverse media sources. We have two excellent speakers with us today. So we're happy to have Priya Sridhar, who is an Emmy award-winning political reporter and host of Politically Speaking. Now our second speaker, who also has a co-speaker with him today, who is, there he is, no meltdown. Omari Fleming has lived all over the country pursuing his passion for journalism. Los Angeles native, is thrilled to be back in Southern California and reporting for NBC7. So as you can see, we have some very well-established, prominent people here today to discuss media. So Priya, I know I gave a little bit of a background. Is there anything else you'd like to elaborate on?
No, I'm happy to be here and hopefully I can help you guys in some way. I'm excited to chat more.
Thank you so much. Omari?
Likewise, and now after hearing Priya's bio, now I realize why I defer to her all the time, and I'm always asking her for questions, asking her for answers to stuff. But yeah, definitely here to help out. I mean, in this day and age, it's important to have media partners, especially when you've got social media that's taking to the forefront, and you have so much misinformation that can be out there as well when it comes to social media. So nice to be able to talk to some of the people behind the scenes in media to be able to help folks out in terms of getting their agendas heard.
I'm going to direct this to Priya first. How can media advocates develop relationships with journalists from different communities? And let me just say before Priya, you answer that, I don't know if you're aware of what most of us do. We do media for substance use prevention. We're focusing on fentanyl and issues around youth marijuana use, methamphetamine. We're trying to prevent kids from using. It's a big issue. We're starting to see kids with fentanyl now dying, unfortunately. So Priya, how can media advocates develop relationships with journalists from different communities?
Well, I mean, I think like obviously Omari and I here are representatives from kind of the quote unquote mainstream media. And so here in San Diego, you know, there's 5 different stations, and we, I think, have a pretty large reach. As Omari kind of mentioned, the landscape is changing a lot. And so people aren't necessarily watching us on TV as much as they are getting their news from our website or maybe our app on their phone or social media. And so I think, you know, it's important to engage with members of the mainstream media because we sort of already have an established legacy audience. We sort of have all of the platforms to reach probably the most number of people, but there's also sort of less traditional outlets, you know, maybe outlets that are geared to certain communities or certain like geographic communities, but also certain you know, ethnic groups, I should say, that are also just as important to reach when you're talking about trying to target certain audiences. And I guess, I mean, the overall thing I would say when it comes to sort of the idea of diverse communities and their representation in the media is that for so long, you know, we would oftentimes only see people of different races being portrayed in maybe very stereotypical ways. And there's been much more of a conscious effort, I guess you could say, in the past few years to make sure that there's inclusion, not just from the people on our side of things, the people who are sort of making the editorial calls about what we should cover, but even just the people that we interview, right? And so there's this very intentional effort to make sure that the people who are delivering the news and the people who we interview, whether that be subject matter experts or the different stories that we choose, are representative of San Diego as a whole. And we're very lucky that we live in a very diverse place. And so sometimes those things can happen very organically. We do oftentimes what we call MOS, which is man on the street interviews, where sometimes we're tasked with like going to a park like Balboa Park, and we might ask people, you know, what are your thoughts on the Padres being in the playoffs? Or what are your thoughts on the fact that it's been raining for, you know, 6 weeks? And hopefully, if we're going to a place that's like accessible to all kinds of people, we're going to get a really great cross section of the people who live in San Diego. But I think it's also the responsibility on the journalists to seek out those places. And, you know that if you're only going to try to do MOS in a place like La Jolla versus going to a place like Chula Vista, you're going to maybe get very different answers to questions, or different people who are going to be walking around when you're, trying to effort those interviews at a certain time in the day. So I just think that there's a lot more thought that goes into where we go, who we talk to. Are we getting people of all different ages and backgrounds and socioeconomic statuses, and make sure that that's represented? And then I just think that from your guys' point of view, making those subject matter experts available to us who are from diverse backgrounds. And, again, it doesn't necessarily need to be the color of your skin. It could even be different ideologies, because especially during the pandemic, we saw that, we were trying to do the research and development as the virus was spreading, right? So everything was happening in real time, and there wasn't necessarily like a collective thinking of this is what's causing COVID, or this is how it's spreading. So it was important for us to, get different viewpoints on what the different thoughts were out there. So I guess those would be my initial thoughts to that question.
And Priya, I also, you touched on something. So we see diversity in the journalists. Are we seeing diversity in the cameramen, the editors, and everyone else, even behind the scenes?
I would say that that's definitely something that managers in all the different news organizations I've worked for are making more of a concerted effort to consider in their hiring process, because I do think that it shapes the finished product that you end up seeing on TV, or that you end up seeing on your phone is, the photojournalist or the producer or the assignment editor, or all the people behind the scenes that go into deciding what stories we cover and who we interview, that they also have a unique perspective to offer. So I think that there is this general understanding in our industry now that it's not just the people out there, and it's not just supposed to be a superficial, like, hey, look, I can see someone who looks like me. That's important too, by the way, but it also should be really shaping the way we put together our stories and what stories we consider covering every day.
Thank you. Omari, I know you got your hands full, but I want to also ask you, how can media advocates develop relationships with journalists from different communities? And to seem sincere.
I would say lots of pizza, donuts, sandwiches, stuff like that. But I think in reality, one of the things that you can do is you talk about you're trying to reach people when it comes to issues with regards to fentanyl and drug use, maybe mental health issues as well too. I think the big thing is just kind of watching the news and seeing what reporter may have. Can you quiet just for a quick second, please? Thank you. You can keep drawing. I think one of the big issues is actually trying to find, just watching the news and seeing who's covered what to a degree, maybe who has what beat, so to speak, or who covers those stories on a consistent basis. So if you've seen potentially maybe some of my stories, I tend to cover a lot of fentanyl stuff. Priya ends up covering politics a lot. So you might want to just reach out to those reporters who have covered stories that you're trying to reach those people that are subject matter in those particular stories. Case in point is we've been doing a lot of stories on fentanyl. We did Poison Pill, Catherine Garcia. She did a major special on that. And so she's somebody that you would want to reach out to. Also, when somebody does do a story, you see something online, just reach out to them via email or whatnot and say, hey, I saw your story. Here's some other issues or subject matter or things that you might want to tackle or consider tackling next time as well too. And I think the other thing, Priya had mentioned ideology in terms of being available, having diverse sources and being available. The ideology, I think that's something that we kind of struggle with when it comes to certain stories. Just looking at our coverage when it came to the border issue just recently, there's definitely people have strong feelings when it comes to the border, but when it comes time to presenting those ideologies or those thoughts at news time, it's a little bit difficult. Number one, because of our deadlines. Two, because of people being made accessible. And so making sure that you have somebody who's pro a particular issue and against a particular issue. And when it comes to like with the fentanyl issues and things like that, there's a lot of people talk about, being able to help folks who are addicted. But what I've had a slightly difficult time finding is those people who are so there's a huge push, as you guys I assume know, to get Narcan out to everybody.
Yeah.
But I know and I've read where there are people who are saying that just enables the addict to continue. And so that the flip side is what we always have a difficult time finding sometimes, and just being able to marry those two together. And the other thing that Priya mentioned was, or I think you had asked maybe, was just in terms of diversity within the newsroom. I think there definitely is diversity in the newsroom when it comes to on camera and behind the camera. What people will say is that the people who are making decisions, the hiring decisions as well, that's where there may be that lack of diversity. I think that we've definitely broken through here in San Diego. Over at certain stations, they definitely have some people in power who are minorities as well. But some folks argue that there could be more that's done.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to go to Marla. I have a question too. Being an openly gay man myself, people will ask me, well, what does every gay man think? And I don't know, because I don't represent the whole gay community. But when I hear about substance use in the gay community, what I hear when somebody mentions substance use is crystal meth. That's a huge issue in the gay community. Now, for different communities, I know historically with drugs, they haven't been handled correctly. So in other communities, when I say substance use, what does that mean? Priya?
I mean, are you asking me what it means in other communities? Like,
Yeah, I think generally, for the Asian community, what does substance use mean? Does it mean police are going to come in? Does it mean treatment? Does it mean many different things? When your ears perk up because, I know we have a meth issue in the gay community.
right?
Actually, I can jump in for you real quick,
Yeah.
Priya, if you don't mind. Because you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, and it triggered my thoughts when you were talking about fentanyl and the crisis that we're having. Just the opioid crisis in general, been around for a minute. I remember in Philadelphia touching on that. And when you talk about race, I think a lot of people initially thought that it was just not necessarily suburban, but more country, more an issue that's more targeted and dealt with people in the country, people who may not have the financial means to do whatever. And what I've been learning more so now is definitely it's hit the teenagers, the suburbs, but what I didn't know is that it was hitting African Americans as well too. And so making sure that the facts are out there. Sometimes if you're sending out a press release, putting in tidbits in terms of how this affects particular minority groups, I think that would definitely help. And also one thing that we try and do is humanize. Priya was kind of talking about MOSs. That's the way that we're actually able to go out and talk to people and talk to people and get a gauge of what their sense is about something. But when it comes to fentanyl, you guys may know Narcan Nate. So he's up in North County. He essentially he's a recovering addict. He is now helping other people, hands out Narcan to a bunch of folks up in the North County area. So when we do fentanyl stories and overdose stories, a lot of times we end up talking to him, and that helps you to put a face on the issue, and people can relate to it a little bit more. Right now, the face of it to me has always been white male for the most part. Just last week, I was doing a story where we were kind of interested in talking to a young lady who was a woman who was a recovering addict who had overdosed and lived to tell the story and actually has gone on to greatness. but she bailed out on us and we couldn't talk to her. But making sure again that you have diverse people available for us to talk to, so that people get a sense of who this is truly impacting.
And Omari, I know I'm gonna go to questions, but I think this is very interesting. You touched on a really good point about the data. Even with fentanyl, African Americans are getting hit harder when you look at the overall population. How do we cross that barrier to get that message into the community that it's not just, white people's concern or anything like that? I mean, what do you do? Maybe I'll let you give you a chance to ponder that. We'll go to Marla. Marla, you have a question, if you can unmute.
So good morning. Thank you, first of all, for being here. I was really looking forward to this training. I have the privilege of facilitating the San Diego County Substance Use and Overdose Prevention Task Force. It is an initiative, merged two initiatives, the Prescription Drug Abuse Task Force that focused on opioids, and the Meth Strike Force that focused on methamphetamine, and we just merged the two. And my question is this: how can media advocates effectively tailor their messaging and their narrative to reach diverse communities?
Yeah, I think some of it's, I mean, we're probably going to be a little bit redundant, but it's a matter of finding those people. It's a matter of finding those people to kind of humanize stories around. You can give all types of facts, tell people all kinds of facts, but they really don't always remember those. What they remember is how something makes them feel, or what they see. And so when you talk about diversity, you're always talking about making sure that people are represented, people can see themselves on the screen, and that's what people relate to. And so again, I think it's a matter of making sure that as I mentioned, Narcan Nate, he's kind of in the face for what it is. I've also spoken to other people as well, and they tend to be hold on, Logan, no, you can't play with that. They also tend to be non-minorities as well too. So I think it's a matter of just making sure that you have that person, or those people who are kind of the faces of the addiction, represented on a large scale. So whether it be somebody who's part of the LGBTQ community, somebody who's Black, somebody who's Latino, somebody who's white, just make sure that those diverse faces are out there. And again, like Priya said, just making sure that you have the different ideology that's out there as well too. And I think that's how you can really reach out, because again, it's a matter of people being able to identify if they're seeing the fact that it's not somebody who looks like them, they're not thinking about it at all. You can hear all the time that it's you can hear these numbers, but oftentimes I'm not a math person, I'm not a numbers person, so I'll glaze over from time to time, and I'm sure a lot of other people do that. And so it's a matter of just what you relate to, what you see, and what you feel.
Yeah, I guess the only other thing I would add to that is, oftentimes outreach efforts are targeted for certain communities, right? So something that might work with, certain people might not work with others, and we saw that during the pandemic, that there's tended to be a distrust of vaccines sometimes in the Black community, for example. And so it appeared to me that what a lot of the, public health workers, their sort of tactic to combat that distrust was to have people within the communities like that were trusted, really try to reach those communities, right? And so I even saw like vaccine clinics take place at churches or like in church parking lots, and I thought that those kind of outreach efforts were really interesting. And then we saw it again with the monkeypox outbreak, and there was a lot of discussion there around who exactly is being impacted by it. And of course, there was no denying that it was impacting the LGBTQ community more so than anybody else. And so then what do those outreach efforts look like? And how do you make sure that you're reaching those people who, need to get tested and need to get vaccinated? And so like Omari said, getting a person who went through a personal experience to share their story, that's really priceless. That's really what I guess us as the media are looking for. But then also, especially if someone who went through something then turns into an advocate and it says, hey, my story moved me so much that I want to make sure that nobody else had to go through what I went through, or I'm making sure that I'm getting the information out there. Those are kind of the best champions to reach people, because instead of someone who's wearing maybe like a stethoscope and a doctor's suit, sometimes you might relate to someone who you think, wow, they had a very similar life experience as me, and that could totally happen to me. So making sure that you identify those people who are going to relate to different groups, and then also if you're doing something interesting when it comes to outreach, that might be another like opportunity to alert the media, like, hey, we're doing something different, and this might be worth covering.
You mentioned something, and then we'll go to Bernard, Miriam, and Ray about the monkeypox. And I think there was a fear in the media to say it was gay related. Most of the people affected were gay men. And I find that if it's important public health information, I want to know. I'm not worried about calling us out. I just want to know if I need to get the vaccine, because most of the people that I saw in the data, 98% were gay men. So just give me the information. Don't worry about offending me. I want the information. So Bernard?
Yeah, thank you. Great answers from both Omari and Priya. Really appreciate it. And Priya, and Omari, just for your background, a lot of the people that are online right now observing this and listening to your responses also have journalism experience. So they are very aware of a lot of the points that you make and have seen them for many, many years, I being one of them. But one of the things that I think that the media, the journalistic media, is slow to, and this is not NBC 739, but across the board, because I've worked in major markets and medium markets and small markets, it's slow to adapt sometimes to the changes that we may identify as advocates for these particular behavioral initiatives and within our regions. And one of them is the notion of harm reduction. So as an example, sometimes I'll listen to reports and I'll hear stigmatizing language within a report, or I'll hear stereotyping within a report. And it's not because the people are bad people or that they're not knowledgeable or smart. It's just that they haven't been exposed to some of the more current understanding of how to best attack an issue such as substance use disorder. Even the word addiction, that the person, a recovering addict versus someone who's recovering from substance use disorder, goes a long way in getting people to open their ears and listen. So I guess my question is the same one that I had a long time ago. How do we train the media or get the media to buy in, media being local journalists, to the notion that that we have new ways of looking at things that may be more helpful than the old ways of looking at things? I equate it to when I first started in journalism, and we would get a report from the whatever police department that an individual was attacked on the street, and witnesses describing him as a 5'8" Hispanic male wearing blue jeans and a white t-shirt. Well, that could be anybody, right? And it may not even be an Hispanic male. It could be someone of, whatever origin. So it's the same with our language through harm reduction. So I just wonder, how do we train the media? Or is the media, in your vision, are journalists open to that? I would love for the substance use and overdose prevention team to be able to go into KNSD or KGTV or whatever KUSI turns into after the sale, and say, hey, we want to do a 45-minute training with you to talk about harm reduction and language that you may consider using in your reports. So anyway, you can tell I'm a former journalist. No,
I think and I think you've probably seen it in the past before too, but I think you're right on track with that. I mean, we already have the fire department who comes in to help train us for wildfires and things like that. And I think it would definitely help considering just the varied types of stories that we cover, that we need that type of training. I mean, we do it well. Priya, is focused on politics for the most part, so she gets a chance to hone in on that. but I could cover any number of things within a week. So, and I have a hard time remembering sometimes too, but so Monday I was doing active trainer awareness. Habata Poway did. They had somebody flying from Israel to help train them when it comes to active shooter and saving lives. And then yesterday I was doing something on acute myeloma leukemia. So I'm a doctor one day, a fire, or not a fire, or a medic, or a first responder the next day. I could be a politician another day. And so it definitely helps. I mean, there's a number of reporters inside the station do the same thing too. And so it would definitely help if sometimes we could have people to come in and speak to us about certain things. And then also you have to, it's a matter of the station as well too. Some stations are more amenable to being schooled in terms of what the new terms are and what the new words are. Our station definitely, other stations in the market may not be, but that's something that we definitely go through at our station is sensitivity training. We've got a diversity and equity and inclusion group that's at our station as well too. So it just depends on the stations, but it would definitely help if we had somebody to come in and speak to us about things. And one last thing is also just making sure that you can talk to reporters on background, giving them information. Some people are afraid to talk to reporters, but if you become a friend to a reporter, and you don't even have to be a friend, just be open to speaking to them, being available, and talking to them about what your program is, and just saying, hey, we've got some new things that are going on, and there may be some new terms in terms of how people are referred to. Because you never know. I mean, I remember when I first got here, it was what was it? Autism. It was I said somebody had autism, and I think the term should have been living with autism to a degree. But it's just something you just don't know, and so sometimes you have to be educated. And some reporters are going to be more amenable than others. Again, some organizations are going to be more amenable to others, but oftentimes if somebody tells me something, then I'm open to the idea of change. But I think the key thing, the critical thing, is going into the stations and maybe doing some type of training. In addition to that, I can only impact myself for the most part. I think the key thing would be to speak to the news directors or one of the producers, to talk to them about these are the changes in terminology that are going that are happening in our industry, because we're seeing it with Border Patrol also. I think the president a couple months ago issued an edict where I should know, but I think we've always known in our station that you can't use alien, but I think that they were still using that at the border. And so the president issued an edict, and you have some of the subordinates who are upset about that. So it's just a matter of the organization and talking to the top brass to let the people know what they can't do, or what they should be doing, and how they should be referring to people.
Priya?
Oh, I was just going to add that in a very simplistic way, we have this tendency to just parrot what other people say, or at least I know I do that. So if you say, if the correct terminology isn't recovering addict and it's something else, if you write that in a press release, whatever the terminology should be, or you speak it when you're speaking to me, I have a very high tendency of, when I'm writing my script, I tend to write exactly like the same way that the person said it to me. So even if you're not like consciously telling me like this is how I want you to phrase it, I will probably just phrase it the way that you phrased it because you're the subject matter expert. Or if someone identifies themselves as, oh, hey, I'm this, and they don't say like, hey, I'm a recovering addict, then I'm probably going to say, well, this person is a blank, because that's how they identified themselves. So I would say that's probably like the fastest and the simplest way. And then I think the more that happens, it's just like repetition, and it becomes part of like our normal vocabulary. And I will say, like, industry wide, we tend to have those discussions, and oftentimes it will be those affinity groups like AAJA or NABJ who will then sort of issue a memo to newsrooms across America and say, we're now going to capitalize Black. I think that was like a real thing that happened during 2020 after the killing of George Floyd, was we decided we're going to capitalize the word Black now. So oftentimes those memos will come from the affinity organizations, and they're so well respected at this point that everyone just sort of goes along and says, okay, this is how we're going to do things now. And then it gets reflected in the AP style book, which, as you guys know, is like the holy grail for journalists. And that's kind of the way you kind of achieve like industry-wide change. But if it's at a very simplistic level, I would say just like put that kind of vocabulary into your press releases, into your talking points, and just try to not make it like overly jargony. Make it very simple so that someone understands what it means in a few short words, instead of like, if you're going to add all these complicated words into something, then you're going to have a higher likelihood that we're going to either paraphrase you or change it into more simplistic language so that people actually understand what it is that the concept that we're trying to convey. So those are my only additional points.
Thank you. Miriam?
Yes, good morning, Steele. My name is Miriam Padilla with the North Inland Substance Use Prevention. And my question is, I work with youth constantly, and I see them using social media to get their media, their news from social media. And I don't see the traditional media like TVs and the written word trying to access the youth or involve them in the work that it's been, or not in the work, but the information that you provide for the rest of the community. And I mean the rest of the community as over 30 years old. What can be done by the traditional media to access the youth and move them away from getting their health news from social media, which most of the time is,
Well,
I'm not going to say it's wrong, but it's misleading.
I mean, I would say that, you know,
Good
instead
luck.
of maybe fighting against it, embrace it a little bit. And so we are very active on Instagram. I mean, I think we have 500,000 followers. So we're trying to meet viewers where they're at, and that includes every kind of demographic. So, I mean, we do Instagram reels, and we make Instagram stories because we understand that that's how people are getting their content. A lot of newsrooms now have Snapchats. And so they're doing Snapchat and TikTok and all of those things. I don't think NBC7 has moved into that space. Individual reporters might have their own accounts, but we haven't as a station gone there yet. But I know, for example, like ABC National, they actually are hiring like TikTok reporters now because they realize that that's where that audience is. So I don't know if it's necessarily trying to force young people to consume their news in a different way, or if we need to go and meet them on the platforms that they're at. And sometimes that means like, first of all, when we talk about diverse hiring, I mean, we also try to make sure that we have reporters who are reflective of that generation, and people are hiring what they call ambassadors now, which are people of the generation who can speak to the generation on the platforms that generation is on, you know? So, I do think that, you know, we do have a lot of young journalists at our station, and they do a lot of stories on people in college and high school and stuff like that. And yeah, I don't know. Omari probably has more to add to.
And I was being sarcastic and saying good luck, but I mean, to a degree, it is kind of, it's rough in this day and age. But I mean, Priya brings up some good points. I think it's about authenticity. That's a huge word that you hear these days, is being authentic. And that's what you kind of see on these social media platforms. We're doing all we can to put the information out on our platforms. Like Priya said, we've got Instagram, we've got websites, but it's about, for whatever reason, you know, we can put a story out about whatever it may be, but there's another Instagram page called Dago TV or something like that, DAY Go TV. But they get a lot of people who respond and react when that person posts the story. And it's partially probably because it's the way that it's presented, a little bit more authentic and not newsy and not as rigid. And I don't know, maybe snarky to a degree, or sarcastic. It's just a little bit more the way that people communicate with each other. And we try and do that as well in the news, is we try and be, you know, real to a degree and be able to be communicative, but it doesn't always come off that way. And we have rules in terms of what we can and can't do. We have standards that we have to adhere to, and all these people who are out here on social media don't have those standards to adhere to. I was saying it the other day to somebody that, if we were, I forgot what story it was, but if we were to do a story where there was some type of death, a mass deaths or something like that, and we were to put bodies out there to put some gory video, we would get so much backlash. But in reality, what people do, a lot of people do, I won't say everybody, but in reality, what a lot of people or some people do is they hear about this gore and then they run to social media or online to see what the gore is. And so that's about that authenticity, reality, not sugarcoating things. And I think that's what people are gravitating towards these days, but they aren't doing the fact checking, as you mentioned. I mean, there's a lot of misinformation out there. I think it's just a matter of the organizations having those people that can speak to the next generation. So whatever your organization is, like Priya said, we hire people who are social media savvy, who are internet savvy, to try and reach that audience. Your organizations have to do that as well too. Just like you need to hire somebody who can speak to a journalist who can speak our language. Now you have to hire somebody who can speak the language of social media. And to this point as well too, I did an interview about 2 months ago with a professor who's on TikTok. She deals with mental health issues, and she said she's got like 1 million followers, so she's kind of an influencer as well too. But she's like a 50, 60-year-old influencer. And she said she started it because she was seeing so much information out there. And so she had to develop her style so that it resonated with the social media crowd. And so that's what we're all in the process of trying to do as journalists now, adapt so that we can, meet the needs of today before we're irrelevant.
I think Priya touched on this. Like, how much independence do you have tweeting on your own? Because you're both public figures. Like, what's the protocol? Can you do that?
Sorry, doing what on our own?
If you wanted to tweet or if you wanted to send out messages, does NBC just say, go right ahead, or is there a protocol?
Yeah, no, I mean, we don't have the staffing to really, babysit us. So we will hear about it if we did something wrong. I will tell you that.
Okay.
But no, I mean, we pretty much have free reign. We kind of, I mean, if you've been in the business for like 15, 20 years like us, you sort of know what you can and can't do.
Yeah.
And I think, we're encouraged to use our platforms to connect directly with the audience. And sometimes I'll do polls on my Instagram or my Twitter, and I'll say, how many people are excited about the election, or, out of these 3 races, which one are you guys following the closest? Like, I find that stuff fun. And sometimes I'll even use it on air and say, like, according to my very non-scientific poll of my social media followers, you guys are super interested in what's going to happen with the sports arena site, and we'll oftentimes like solicit engagement through all of the different platforms. So I'll sometimes say, like, ask me a question on Twitter, and then I'll tell you the answer on TV, and that's kind of our way to move all of our audiences from one place to another and get them to like see us on all of our various platforms. And we do try to use each of the platforms differently. I think there was in the olden days when we were trying to adjust to the technology, we thought, okay, we can just stick a TV story and just put it on Instagram and it's going to just do great, exactly the way it was. And it turns out that's not the case. And, Instagram, it's like the video has to be vertical. The stories can only be 11 seconds long, but you can do things like Instagram lives, where now all of a sudden you're having like a conversation with someone that can basically go on forever, and people can join you. They can ask questions through the chat feature. So I think it's just being creative about how you use each platform, and then again, like driving people between the different things. Like, hey, if you want to have more of a conversation about the District 4 election, like meet me over on Instagram and we'll be doing a live Q&A at 4 p.m. or something like that. So yeah, it doesn't necessarily always need to be the same perfectly packaged and edited and curated little story that you would get on a television platform.
And also the other thing also is when you see that misinformation, you can easily retweet or write something beneath it to correct that information. Now you you may catch the ire of trolls, but I mean that's kind of the nature of social media. And I was speaking about the professor who became an influencer, and that's kind of what she started doing. She got so frustrated at the misinformation that she ended up correcting the misinformation. So she would present the misinformation and then say, this is why it's wrong. And so you guys can do that as well in your organizations. If you see some misinformation potentially, you can retweet and correct, or if you see something on there that you like, that's good, retweet that just to, amplify the message out there as well.
Great. Ray?
Yes, thanks again for being here. And we use the AP style book, I just want to say, and thanks for calling that out. And we've talked a little bit about outreach and social media, and a lot of people think about social media connected to youth, but I wonder if you have any insight into ways that media advocates can use social media to reach more diverse communities.
I think it's
Oh, go ahead, Omari.
no, it's just, I think probably just a matter of knowing the people who are involved, like Priya mentioned, knowing the people who are involved, the organizations who are involved, and teaming up with them, reaching out to them on social media, and even in real life. I mean, part of getting into the Black community is via the churches, as Priya had mentioned before. So sometimes even though you want to reach out via social media, you have to do it in real life as well too, and you have to use that combination. I'll let you jump in, Priya.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I would say like this is going to sound like a very traditional old school answer, but just like networking. I mean, make sure that your own network of people that you're talking to is diverse. And if it's not, then go out and actively seek that, I mean, especially during everything that happened in 2020 with the killing of George Floyd, I was oftentimes being sent to like get reaction from community activists. And it's like, I didn't know who those people were really. I was still new to this job. And so I started going and like wandering around in Encanto, and I stumbled across this barber shop. And it turns out that this barbershop has been sort of a fixture in the civil rights history here in San Diego. And if you go in there, it's almost like a museum. They have all these black and white pictures from different protests that have happened over the years. And I was like, wow, this place is, I mean, it was insane and amazing. And everybody that was a barber there had been born and raised in Southeast San Diego. They had friends, and I sort of just started like hanging around in the barber shop, and they would introduce me to people, or sometimes they didn't feel comfortable necessarily sharing their own thoughts on something, but they were like, hey, I have a friend that might be willing to talk, and they'd literally call them up and be like, hey, come down to the barber shop, So, I mean, that was just a weird place. I wasn't like actively looking for a barber shop, but when you kind of go out and literally wander around the streets and you see where people are going, and you sort of stumble across these places. And I think just like finding, again, those, think outside the box, find people who are really trusted in those communities. Another example I can think of off the top of my head is, I love, this is really random, but I love listening to Jammin' 95.7 on the radio. And I'm a huge fan of Beto Perez, who's one of their DJs. And he's kind of like a rock star icon, especially in the Hispanic community in Chula Vista. So it's like, who would have thought of that? And he DJs at bars on the weekends in Chula Vista, and he just has a huge following and everybody knows him. But again, it's like you wouldn't necessarily connect all those dots. But, he's even told me that he's been sought out by politicians who are trying to make, reach those voters in the South Bay, and they think, hey, if we hang out with Beto, maybe the people in the South Bay will take notice of me suddenly. So just, again, thinking outside the box, you might not think, hey, I want to go to a barber shop, or hey, let me befriend a Hispanic DJ, but sometimes those are the ways, those are the trusted people, right, that are reaching those target communities or demographics that you're trying to get to.
One other thing also too is speaking about reaching people is looking, you're talking about doing it online, looking at whatever web page may be or a social media page may be for whatever minority group, and just looking at their follows. You go through their follows and find out who it is that's what this organization is. You can read what they posted to see how they communicate, and you can reach out that way as well too. And then a kind of an old school way. I mean, I'm always surprised when I see various minorities pop up on television as well too. I mean, again, to our point earlier, when I see that, I just take notice. I'm like, oh, you have an expert in such and such who's Japanese, or you have an expert in such and such who's African American, and that always just puts my antenna up. So just keeping an eye out, like I said, on television, and then on social media, looking at the various minority organizations and seeing who they follow. You can follow along, you can reach out to them, you can see what they've been posting.
Great. Kelly?
Thanks for this great panel. This is such good information. I have a question. I hope it makes sense. But if, for example, we put together a conference of some sort, or a town hall or a forum, that the station is not able to get on the air on one of the news shows, is there still a possibility of individual reporters kind of talking about that in their social media, or kind of taking the story that way, even if it didn't get on the traditional news show at a certain time?
I mean, I would say if a reporter is there at the forum, then they're likely to, put something on their own social media. But the reason they would probably be there is if they were doing a story. So, but I will say that we actually send sometimes our web team out to do their own thing. So it doesn't necessarily, like, they're not doing something that a TV reporter is doing. So sometimes things can be pitched in a way where we're like, oh, that would be a great story for web, or they can do something great on Instagram for it. So, I mean, that also is something to consider, I guess, when you guys are thinking about pitching stories or trying to reach certain audiences, is like, if something that you're organizing seems like, hey, this is something that probably ideally could be showcased on NBC7's Instagram, then tell us that. I mean, a lot of times it'll be these weird quirky things, like, I don't want to say like a dog fashion show, but I mean, like, we've done literally things like dog surfing contests, and that's done really well on our Instagram. So but I joke to people all the time that because sometimes they're like, oh, that was just on your Instagram, or, oh, I didn't catch it on TV. And I tell them, listen, we get way more hits if you look at the actual analytics through our website and through our Instagram than eyeballs on TV. I mean, it's actually like not even close. So yeah, I mean, I guess that would be my thoughts on that.
I think the other thing is kind of one of the thoughts that I had was knowing your audience to a degree, or knowing the various news shows, because you have our morning shows, our day shows, and our night shows are kind of totally different in terms of what we cover. So one thing is, even though we may not be able to show up to your event, maybe we could promote it on our morning show. So getting in good with the producers there on the morning show. And speaking of getting in good, the other thing that I meant to mention was also getting in with the assignment editors, or the assignment desk, because they're kind of the brain center of our operation. And so they're the ones who end up, they take in all the information, typically, for the most part. You can tell us as reporters that, hey, this is going on. And then I keep it in my mind, but I also send it to the assignment desk. And then when it's the day of, then I can reinforce it for you that, hey, this event is going on. And so this is something we need to look at. But if you're talking to the assignment desk and build a really good relationship with them, and say, hey, I've got this event, I don't know what particular show it would be good for, but I'd like to get some type of coverage, even if it's not somebody coming out to us. Maybe you guys, as Priya mentioned, could do it just for something online, or maybe you guys could just have something for social media. It's just a matter of kind of knowing where your stories would fit in well in the news show. So if it comes to, you know, fentanyl and the crisis and whatnot, overdosing, then that's something that I could definitely do on the night side, for, not trying to be punny, but night side a little bit darker to a degree, a little bit heavier. And then day side can be a little bit lighter, but you cover the issues of the day that are going on as well too. So if the mayor is out there, you know, pushing some new fentanyl agenda, or the governor is talking about, you know, making Narcan available, then those are things that are going to be happening during the day. So kind of just knowing what the audience is through the day, what stories could potentially work well, and just building those relationships with the reporters. You know, again, if you see somebody's covering this particular story, then hey, you know, this is my wheelhouse. Maybe I'll send them some information about this, or I've got an event coming up. Maybe you might be interested in this. And just keep it kind of simple, because as Priya mentioned, like, I see a gang of press releases come to me, and like numbers, my eyes just start glazing over. And sometimes, you know, you don't want to be buzzy or think about headlines, but if you do have kind of a buzzy headline to a degree, or buzzy subject title line, it catches your attention. Last night, one thing that caught our attention was this family member talking about the lady who had bone marrow, or needed a bone marrow transplant. The fact that she had the perfect match was available, but it was thousands of miles away, or perfect match available, but it's being but she's being kept away from it. And something about that just caught the attention. And so just making sure that you have something that catches the attention of the assignment desk, or the reporter, or whomever.
I think that the morning show is like the biggest untapped turf right there, because if you look at just numbers, our morning show goes from 4:30 a.m. to 7, so that's 2.5 hours of live news, and they have
Content.
only 2 reporters. And so oftentimes they're having to, in order to fill all that time and the content, they're taking stuff from the day before, right? The day side shows, it's also 2.5 hours, because we have an hour at 4, an hour at 6, and then a half an hour at 5. But we also have 7 to 8 reporters sometimes that work during the day. So it's just way more competitive to try to like get into those shows, because that's when all of the stuff is happening during the normal business hours, 9 to 5, when all the politicians are out there doing stuff. And then the 11 p.m. show, it's just it's a 30-minute show. So if you're willing to like wake up in the morning and offer yourself up to do a live interview, the morning show is very likely to take it.
And Priya, you're selecting those morning shows, topics the day before, 2 days before, how long before?
I mean, I would say that they're a lot more organized than us, because they do have to plan ahead, especially because most people won't wake up at 4:30. So,
Right.
I mean, the biggest thing that happens, I would say, obviously, as you guys know, is like if something newsworthy happens, like a 7-car pileup on the highway, then oops, all of a sudden you're gone. But if it's something that's not necessarily time sensitive, they could always reschedule you to the next day. And I've done it because a lot of political candidates want to come in and do interviews, and I'm like, it's not going to happen during the evening newscast, but if you want to wake up and come here, they will do the anchors can do it themselves. So even if the reporter is distracted with something else, the anchor can do an interview with you, and they'll take it because they're happy to have the coverage. So yeah, I would say reach out a day or two before, and oftentimes they will preview events like Omari was saying. So if you're doing a huge town hall on fentanyl, and they're like oftentimes looking for hard news stuff, because, you know, it's difficult at that hour to get things that are going to be, you know, newsy. So if you pitch it and it's newsy and it's hard, there's a very good chance they'll go for it.
And one last thing, I'm sorry to cut you, but one last thing also is we were just talking about the different platforms. So we mentioned social, we mentioned online, we mentioned just our morning show, our 4, 5, 6, and 11 o'clock shows. One thing that we forgot to mention is it's kind of new to us, is our streaming platform on Roku. And so it's kind of like you think of a Netflix or a Peacock or HBO. These are now, with streaming, you have you know, these channels that you have to just put all this content on, just an open chasm. So that's also another platform that you may want to try and tap as well too. So if you're talking to the assignment editor to say, hey, I know you guys have the streaming channel, we've got somebody who could come on and talk about this. And that's actually one of the channels that'll give you a lot more time, I think, to be able to get your message across, because I don't even know if they have time limits really, Priya. They just go, right?
It's like a cable channel, so they
Yeah.
can go for as long as they want. And I know it sounds weird and experimental, but we actually did an open house the other day with public affairs officers from all the military bases here at NBC7, and our general manager was speaking, and she was saying that in our evening newscast, we have about 15,000 viewers per newscast. And she said that number was like 3 times as high on our streaming platform. So you might think, because maybe we don't use streaming platforms, everyone who's here on this call, that nobody's doing that. But she asked all the members of the military who were in the open house, how many of you have a cable subscription? And literally not one person raised their hand, not one. And everybody was getting their news either through the NBC7 app or the streaming platform, which are 2 separate things. It's like a Roku channel essentially, but anyone can get that and you don't have to pay for it. So that's where the people are going. And we loop things over and over and over again. So I host this show, Politically Speaking. Whenever I host that show, it'll air like 4 times a day on the streaming platform. It's insane. And so they can see the metrics of that, and they're actually very high. So it's a good way to get the word.
And it goes national also too. So people from across the country tune into it as well. So I've got friends in, as you, for Joe, like your friends in New York could actually, check out your stuff.
Do you mind if we have 2 more questions? I want to be respectful of your time. Omari, I know you've been wrestling over there. You're hanging in, so we got to get to Ann and then Rob.
Hi there. I have a question. My program does things, all our activities are in the north part of the county, and everything from Borrego Springs on down to Poway. And I have found it extremely hard when I talk to the assignment editors. They're interested in the stories until I tell them where they are, and they don't want to come out. I've had one in the last month tell me flat out, I can send somebody up there and it'll take half a day, or I can send them to something, or send them different stories down here, and I can get 3 or 4 stories out of them. So what can I do to get them to cover what we're doing up here?
Yeah, I don't know if you saw my reaction right off when you said Borrego Springs.
Yeah, we don't do anything.
That gives you an idea. I don't know, is there any way of meeting us in the middle, or I know it's you. I don't know.
We buy you coffee and donuts.
Yeah, I know, huh? That's a
really,
hard one.
I have put on advisories, food.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that first of all, there are people who live in the North County who love to do North County stories, because then they can just leave from their house and go straight to wherever they're going. So identifying those people, we used to have Artie Ojeda, who, he was not opposed to doing that kind of stuff at all. People like to stick around where they live anyways. So if you can identify those reporters who live up there, like reach out to them directly, and it is sad. It's sad that the assignment desks are telling you that, because that is definitely true, that we have a limited amount of resources. And when you have to send someone far away, that could mean overtime for somebody. It could mean someone having to come in earlier to work or whatever. But we should be covering our entire DMA, our viewing area. I wouldn't say maybe equally, but we should be doing geographically diverse stories as well. And then there are certain, organizations like KPBS who have a North County reporter. The Union Tribune has dedicated people who do all of their reporting basically in the North County. So it makes sure that you go and have a coffee with those people and establish yourself, because especially with a topic like fentanyl, it's a huge, huge story, and it's going to be an issue in the next election cycle. It's definitely top of mind for everyone across the country. And so if they can find sources in that area that they're supposed to be focusing their reporting on, they will likely tap into you. So maybe it's just a matter of them, the people who are working those beats, knowing that you're out there and you're willing to help them find good personal stories or connect them to people who've been impacted by all of this.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate that.
We'll go to Rob and close out with Bernard.
Okay, thanks. This has been very informative. I just wanted to ask a couple questions. I'll keep it shorter. We did a thing in January, and luckily for us, it was about fentanyl, and it had students, and it was in town. So Dana Williams came out, and she did a couple of live reports from the school where this happened. And I think your station also recycled it to a VOSOT the next morning. But what's funny is when I'm going back through the 4, 5, and what are the your three casts in the afternoon, what we think of as afternoon, when you fast forward through those, there are only 3 local stories on there over and over and over again. And it's kind of like, if it ain't fentanyl or breaking news or a big dumpster fire, how do we crack into that? And one of the ways I did that in pitching that story, and again, I was lucky. It was fentanyl, it was a hot topic. We got 2 stations to come out and do it live. But when I pitched to the assignment desk, I said, if you can't make a package out of this, I will buy you lunch at your favorite restaurant, 2 drink minimum. I said, if you can't I dare you to look at this and not make a package out of this because it will work. And I got 3 different responses from KNSD. And the other thing I did was on a different story, I said, I can get your photojournalist or your reporter in and out of there in 15 minutes with enough for a VOSOT, and they can be down the road and it'll be in the can, which on a different story got good response from a different station. However, the photojournalist covered 8 stories that day. He went back and he threw the video to some mook at the desk, which I used to be, the guy who rewrote stuff that people throw at them. And it got 1 VOSOT on, and it was kind of like, dude, it was already cut. And this ties back around to what Priya, you were saying about the morning show. You guys had this. It was already cut into a VOSOT on this other story. Well, it wasn't you guys, it was a different station. Overnight, how do I get a hold of, is there a chance that somebody's going to be building the morning show overnight that I can call and say, look, you got this in the can. You can use this 2 or 3 times in the morning. It's still good. Or is it something that really needed to be done the day before with the morning show people? Is that
Yeah,
clear?
I
It's
think-
like, sometimes I know you guys got this, and if somebody just looks at the tape, they're going to be, an editor can make this into a story. I swear in 4 minutes, they can cut this down into a good VOSOT or even an anchor package. But how do we break in there? Is it possible to do overnight at KNSD?
I would say that the rundowns aren't made until that morning. So I believe that people start coming in at like 2:30 in the morning. Omari, do you know the story producers and the producers?
I used to be one of those guys. I'm only 26 years old, but this is why I look this way from being at work at 1:30 in the morning.
They come in at 10:30, 11.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So even maybe try, if you call the night before and ask for someone who's working on the morning show, that might be one way. But also, by the way, these people don't change. So once you figure out who that person is, then you always know who they are and you can always email them. So yeah, I mean, I'm assuming that in that specific instance, it was probably just something got lost in translation or miscommunication. What they normally do is they'll go back and read all the rundowns from the day before and just pull things from there. That's kind of how they operate. But yeah, I mean,
But also if you have that good relationship with one of the producers, you know, you speak the language, so you can talk to those guys and say, hey, you know, I know you may just run it in 4, 5, and 6, but I said, yo, this is good for the morning show as well too. So just making sure, again, you have those relationships, you speak that language, and you know, tell the people that you're talking to that, you know, this still has legs, this can still run, you know, an XYZ show as well too. But then again, build those morning show contacts, so that you can be able to talk to them as well too and tell them why this should work and whatnot.
And I want to thank you both for sharing your information with us. It really is appreciative, you know. I want to go to Bernard to close us out.
Hi, thanks everybody. 2 quick comments. Number 1, just because I have the experience and I've been there too for both sides of the fence. You guys, I would encourage you all, if you don't already, learn how to shoot your own stuff, learn how to post your own stuff, learn how to, and relationships. The other day, well, a couple weeks ago, we did an event. I put the press release out. Channel 10 called me and said, we can't be there. Can you send me video? And I did. And guess what? They used it. But we have to be quick. We have to be as quick as the journalists have to be. That means knowing how to post as soon as you shoot something. Get it up online so that they can utilize it. So that's my comment and advice there. Number two, Priya and Omari, thank you for emphasizing lived experience as a valuable tool for bridging us to the specific data and information that we generate through all of our initiatives and through all of the regions and all of the different programs that we have in order to be put out good factual information to diverse communities. And then my question goes to Priya, because we've heard you emphasize a couple of times, Omari, that she covers politics, but politics involves policy. So a lot of the things that we work on involve policy. And so we want to know how to keep you interested in our policy issues as we move through them, and so that you will take interest to cover them. One of the things that I remember through a consulting symposium that I went to related to journalism is that viewers do not like one thing intensely, and that is when the loop is not closed on a subject matter. So we might begin a policy such as, take a look at how THC edibles are harming youth. And we may get a day of story on that, but we want follow-up on that because we want to change the policies that the state has related to how this is viewed. So my question is, how do we get you to follow that with us?
Yeah, so I would say news coverage, as you guys know, is very events driven. So sometimes I'll cover something when a bill is being proposed. And if the sponsor of that bill is willing to talk about why they think it's important, and then of course I would want to connect with people like you guys, or you guys could connect me to people like subject matter experts who could speak to, why edibles in youth are bad. And, if there's someone, again, like a parent who maybe has a story that they could share as well, that's great. And then, sadly, sometimes we wait until it gets voted on in the state assembly or something. Or, it could be like Mayor Gloria went to Sacramento recently to give testimony, I believe, on a fentanyl proposal that ended up, I don't think it passed. I forget exactly what it was. But, his office put out a press release. So I went in and I followed the hearing or whatever was happening. I watched his testimony, and then there were various people that came in and gave public comment. And so that's how I followed that story. So I would say, definitely be on top of the cycle of a bill. So when is it being proposed? When is it going to be heard in a committee? When is it going to be voted on? When is it going to go back to a committee? When is the governor going to sign it? Those are all times during the life cycle of that issue that I'm likely to go in and do a story, or especially if it's like a citizens ballot measure. Those are really interesting to me. Like once it's being proposed, people going around and collecting signatures. And then if there's an event like a rally or something like that, it always generally has to be tied to some sort of news peg, unless we've just never covered it at all. And then that initial story, we'll do it kind of whenever. But I would say if you can say tomorrow the committee is going to be hearing it, so we'd love for you to, then it makes it a little bit more newsworthy.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. That's a great, clear answer.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Priya. I know you're busy. Omari had to sign off. You did an amazing job speaking and also handling the children. So I appreciate it. And again, thanks so much for the email and the phone number and the advice. We appreciate you and the prevention community. So everyone have a great day. And I hope to see you probably tomorrow for the CWMA meeting.